Joining us on a virtual turtle walk on the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge, the #1 nesting beach in the world for loggerheads and a globally significant beach for greens and leatherback sea turtles. This is the only refuge established in the United States specifically for sea turtles, and it is named after our founder, Dr. Archie Carr, who started the global movement to protect sea turtles over 60 years ago. My name is Sarah Rhodes-Ondy. I'm the Community Stewardship Coordinator at the Barrier Island Sanctuary in Melbourne Beach, Florida. My co-host today is Dr. Dan Evans, Sea Turtle Conservancy's Senior Research Biologist with over 24 years of experience in sea turtle conservation. Our flow for our program today, we will kick off with an Our Sea Turtles presentation by Dr. Dan Evans, and then we'll move to a question and answer session. Please feel free to type all of your questions in the Q&A box and avoid the chat box. We don't want to lose any of your questions. And then after the question and answer session, we'll head out to the Carr Refuge and observe a nesting loggerhead sea turtle. And then we'll have a few more minutes for questions at the end. So with that, I want to also make a note that all of the video that we took for this virtual turtle walk was taken with a infrared night vision photography scope, and didn't disturb the turtles whatsoever. With that, let's welcome Dr. Dan Evans for our Sea Turtles presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. So this presentation, hope to introduce you to the world of sea turtles if it's new for you. If you're familiar with sea turtles, maybe you'll learn something new, but in general, we just want to sort of introduce you to the sea turtles that are found in the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge and in Florida, and just get you a feeling for how amazing these animals really are. Alrighty. So as Sarah mentioned, this sort of focusing around the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. It was established in 1989, and it's an unusual refuge. One, that it was specifically done for sea turtles, and two, it has a north and a south boundary. It's located in central east coast of central Florida, and it's not all federal lands. It's a mix of federal and state protected lands as well as county lands. The majority of it is within Brevard County in Florida, but there are also private land holdings within the boundaries of the refuge as well. So it makes it fairly unique. As Sarah mentioned, it's globally important, probably the most important nesting site in the world for loggerhead sea turtles, and it's really has good nesting numbers for greens and leatherbacks as well, the three common species we get nesting in Florida and specifically in the refuge as well. So the Carr Refuge was created through sort of a cooperation of a lot of different partners who worked together to get it formed. The Sea Turtle Conservancy, we were founded back in 1959 to support the work of Dr. Archie Carr, our founding scientific director, and who the refuge is named after. But also in Brevard County is the Environmentally Endangered Lands Program. And so they're working to protect endangered lands in Brevard County for the preservation for both recreation and education, environmental education as well. And we partner with them to run the Barrier Island Center, which is sort of considered the sort of welcome center for the Archie Carr Refuge, because there's no official U.S. Fish and Wildlife Welcome Center. And that's where Sarah is located. In addition, the University of Central Florida both monitors the nesting beach. So they do morning surveys to count the number of nests, and that gives us an idea of how well the season's going. But they also monitor the lagoon and the nearshore reefs, looking for juvenile sea turtles, and they've been doing that for over 30 years now. So a great place to start is what is a sea turtle? Right? They're air-breathing reptiles, so they have lungs like you and I do. They don't have gills. They can't stay underwater indefinitely. They have to come up to breathe fresh air. Though if they're resting, green sea turtles have been recorded staying underwater for 6 to 8 hours. So they're definitely really good at metabolizing the oxygen in their blood and sort of slowing their body down, almost like a meditation state. They're one of the very few reptiles that are completely adapted for the marine environment. So as you can see in that photo, they have flippers or fins instead of having arms and legs and hands and fingers. Instead, is these really well-developed swimming appendages, they're flippers, and very streamlined body. Those front flippers are very strong and power stroke for swimming quickly away from predators, and then the rear flippers are used primarily for steering. But as a female, they do have to come ashore to lay eggs. They lay eggs that must have air to survive, so if they're laid in the water, they will not survive. And they use those rear flippers as the major part of digging that egg chamber, which you'll see later in the presentation. They do spend about 90% of their lives actually underwater, so that is why they have these total adaptations to live in the marine environment. They're also one of the very few animals that connects the beach ecosystem with the marine ecosystem. And they move nutrients from the marine ecosystem up onto the beach in the form of eggs. So not all the eggs hatch, not all the hatchlings make it out of the nest. These do provide food for predators, but it also provides nutrients for the beach and dune vegetation. The history, the fossil record history for sea turtles goes back over about 150 million years. So when dinosaurs were roaming the earth, sea turtles' ancestors were swimming in the oceans. So the three primary species we get nesting here in Florida and within the Archie Carr Refuge are the loggerhead sea turtle, the green sea turtle, and the leatherback sea turtle. And I'll talk about each one of these. So the most common species of sea turtle nesting throughout Florida, and pretty much anywhere there's a sandy beach in Florida, there's some level of sea turtle nesting, loggerhead sea turtle nesting. They get their name from their really large head compared to their body. And they have this really large head because of their diet. So they're eating hard-bodied organisms like crabs and clams, shellfish, horseshoe crabs. So hard-bodied organisms, so they have very, very powerful jaws. And so they have a large head to accommodate those really large, powerful jaws. Their shell is about 3 to 3.5 feet long, so they're about a mid-size of all the sea turtle species. Worldwide, there are actually 7 different types or species of sea turtle. And in Florida, we actually get 5 of those 7 species. And these 3 that I'm talking about are the primary nesting species here. And the other ones we get in our waters. Loggerheads nest in May, June, July, and into August. And that's similar for green sea turtles. As I mentioned, the University of Central Florida does beach monitoring to count the number of nests each night. And they do that by finding the tracks. They don't need to find every single turtle because you can tell the type of turtle based on the type of track. And the image on the far right is the track of a loggerhead. It's sort of this alternating comma-shaped pattern. And that's distinct from a green sea turtle. So even though they nest at similar times of year, they're able to tell one from the other just based on the track. And there's about 12 to 14 days between nestings. And they'll nest every about 2 to 3 years. And this is the turtle that we'll be showing you video of nesting later on. So the next most common species of sea turtle we get nesting is the green sea turtle. And it gets its name not from any green coloration due to algae or things growing on its shell, but primarily because of its diet. So as adults, green sea turtles are vegetarian or herbivores, and they're eating sea turtle grass and algae that tend to be green in color. And they actually transfer that green color to the color of their fat. So instead of being white like ours, it's more of a greenish tinge, and even their muscle is, instead of being really deep red, is more of a greenish tinge as well. As I mentioned, they nest in June, July, August, and even into September. So we're still, we're sort of at the end of the nesting season for greens. We're definitely past the loggerhead nesting season at this point, though you get 1 or 2 stragglers coming into nest. You can see the track in the middle. So it's it's sort of more of a tire tread or a tank tread pattern with parallel lines and then a tail drag down the middle. Their shell length is about 3.5 to 4 feet, about 350 to 450 pounds in weight. So a bit bigger than loggerheads, but their head is actually smaller because you don't need really strong jaws to eat seagrass. So while we get some decent number of nesting of green turtles here in Florida, there's a lot of green sea turtle nesting throughout the Caribbean, with the largest nesting population probably in the world in Tortuguero, Costa Rica. And why I mention that is because Tortuguero is actually where the Sea Turtle Conservancy started with Dr. Carr's work in the early 1950s, and that we continue there today. And so it's neat, sort of a connection with Tortuguero being one of the most important green sea turtle nesting sites in the world, where STC is working, and then loggerheads being important here in Florida, where STC is working, and it's a pretty cool connection. The last species we get nesting in good numbers here in Florida and in the Carr Refuge is the leatherback sea turtle. So the leatherback sea turtle is unique and different from other species of sea turtle based on its shell. So it gets its name from having more of a leathery, tough skin rather than having scales or scutes like the other species do. So it's very unreptile-like. They don't have scales even on their flippers. It's all this really smooth skin, so it's more like a dolphin or a whale skin. And we believe that this is an adaptation to allow them to do a couple different things. One is that there's actually a little small layer of blubber for insulation or fat, like you get in marine mammals. That lets them tolerate colder waters and temperatures. In addition, having a flexible shell allows them to dive down really deep in the ocean, 1,000 meters, over 3,000 feet. And at those depths, if you had a hard body, that body would be crushed by the pressure. And their flexible shell allows their body to compress without harming them. They actually nest earlier in the year, so March, April, May, June during our spring. They'll also nest, 2 to 3 times every 2 to 3 years, and nest anywhere from 4 to 6 times in a nesting season, even up to 8 or 9 times in some occasions. They are the largest sea turtle species and probably the largest reptile in the world, getting 6 to 8 feet in length and 600 to 1,000 pounds in weight. Amazingly enough, these huge animals eat entirely jellyfish. That is their favorite food, or jellyfish and other soft-bodied animals. And it's estimated that they probably have to eat their weight in jellyfish every 2 to 3 days. And so they have to travel great distances to find these groups or blooms of jellyfish, and then spend days and days just sort of feeding on those jellyfish until they have to move on and find another source of food. Their track is very similar to a green sea turtle, but almost twice as wide. And STC has sort of a connection to leatherbacks as well. One of the largest leatherback nesting populations is down in the Bocas del Toro region of Panama, where STC is monitoring multiple beaches down in there for leatherbacks as well as for hawksbills. So one of the things that we do to monitor the nesting populations, and in the Carr Refuge, this is the University of Central Florida, is checking to see these turtle tracks and whether the tracks resulted in a nest. So did the female actually successfully nest? The picture on the right, titled False Crawl. So this is an indication that the turtle came out of the water, turned around, so it looks kind of like a horseshoe, and did not nest. For some reason, she got disturbed or didn't feel that it was safe to continue nesting. In contrast, the one on the right, you can see a large disturbed area of sand, and that indicates that there was a nesting attempt and most likely a successful nest. You get this large disturbed area of sand, and you'll see an example of why there's such a large area in the video we show later on. And so that would be considered a successful nest. After about 60 days, the hatchlings all emerge from that nest together. It's called a boil of hatchlings, and it generally happens early evening or early morning, generally a drop in the temperature, the sand temperature, to indicate that it's dark or there's some kind of protection. On the right, you can see is the track of a hatchling sea turtle, just a much smaller version of the adults. Hatchlings focused on the brightest horizon and as their way to find the ocean on a naturally dark beach. The ocean water and the wave action would create a naturally light horizon compared to the dune behind them, and they would move towards that. Unfortunately, it's not easy to be a sea turtle. The first 24 to 48 hours of a hatchling's life are spent using the rest of their energy from the eggs. And generally that's going to be rushing down the beach to reach the water and then swimming out several miles to find these floating mats of sargassum seaweed. And then they spend the next 10 to 15 years of their life just drifting in these mats of seaweed, finding food, hiding from predators, until they're large enough that they're sort of juvenile or their teenage years. And then they move into coastal areas, nearshore waters or lagoons and estuaries, and are feeding in those kind of areas, sort of protected a bit more from predators potentially, and spending the next another 10 to 15 years getting bigger, growing up, until they reach about that 25 to 30 year mark when they're now considered adults and are old enough to have young of their own. Both the females and the males will then travel to the nesting beach where they themselves hatch from, and the females will start the process all over again. As a result of both natural predators and human activities, only about 1 in 1,000 hatchlings reaches that 25 to 30 year age mark. So it's a very low survival rate. And as I mentioned, they do have their role in the ecosystem. They do provide food and nutrients for a lot of other animals. But that 1 in 1,000 survival rate is primarily due to human activity. So things like marine debris, so balloons or plastic bags floating in the water. We know what a plastic bag or a balloon is when we see it, but a sea turtle has no idea of what it is. So they think it's the closest thing that they can imagine it being, which is jellyfish. And all species of sea turtle, up to even greens as juveniles, will eat jellyfish as a food source. And so they accidentally eat these plastic bags or the balloons. And if they're not cared for and treated, then those can cause pretty serious problems for the turtle. Fishery bycatch is a big issue for sea turtles, especially for loggerheads and leatherbacks. And this is a situation where fishermen are out trying to catch some other item, generally or fish item like swordfish or tuna or crabs or whatever, but they're accidentally catching sea turtles as well. And so this can be mitigated, it can be solved. There are some solutions to this, changing the type of hook, changing the type of bait, time of year that the traps or the lines are set to be able to reduce that. But this has a pretty significant impact on sea turtles worldwide. Boat strikes. So in Florida, our busy nesting season is our summers. It's also busy with lots of people out in the water and on boats. So we've been seeing more and more boat strike injuries. In the case, generally it's the propeller that hits the turtle as it's trying to dive away from the boat. Oftentimes, if the turtle survives and they're brought into a rehabilitation center, like the picture of the turtle on the right, that loggerhead, you can see the marks in the back of its shell. Unfortunately, it often causes damage to the turtle, making the turtle non-releasable, so it has to stay in captivity for the rest of its life. Coastal development. So obviously people love to be on the beach, especially here in Florida or anywhere there are beaches. So you get a tendency for hotels or big condominiums and houses and stuff to be built on the beach. And this can impact sea turtles in a variety of ways. One is if people build seawalls or rock revetments to try to reduce the beach erosion in front of their property. This can actually completely eliminate where a sea turtle can nest. In another case, this example of this photo are artificial lights that are shining on the beach. As I mentioned, hatchlings are attracted to the brightest horizon. So if you have all these lights on, then the hatchlings are going to go towards those lights rather than towards the water. In addition, opposite of that are the adult females that are actually scared off by lights. They consider it a danger. It sort of exposes them to potential predators, and they avoid even coming up to nest on a beach that has a lot of lights on it as well. So with all these things that are impacting sea turtles, what are some of the things that we all can do, no matter where we are, to sort of help sea turtles? And this is these were based on the words sea turtles, going down that left side. So it starts with S, support sea turtle conservation and research and rehabilitation. Here in Florida, there are a lot of sea turtle groups that you can support. Local ones. There are also, we have a sea turtle license plate that people can buy. It's like a specialty tag for their vehicles. And there's an extra fee that goes into a program that funds both the state's Marine Turtle Protection Program as well as a grants program that funds all kinds of sea turtle projects and activities and educational endeavors here in the state of Florida. And obviously, Sea Turtle Conservancy as a nonprofit organization are supported through donations as well. Educate others. So share what you learn about today. Try to help educate others about sea turtles and the threats to sea turtles and what people can do. The Barrier Island Center, where Sarah works, is an educational facility. And we also have an online Tour to Turtles educational program that's going on right now as well. So like a virtual race among sea turtles that we satellite tag. So there's a lot of educational opportunities. Advocate for sea turtles and their environment. So get involved with things and making comments on laws or legislation that either benefit or harm sea turtles. Support those that benefit and sort of, raise your opposition to activities or laws that are going to harm sea turtles in their habitats. So get involved to the degree you feel comfortable with, but there are a lot of things that can be done to help advocate for sea turtles and the marine environment. Take direct action to protect sea turtles. So get involved with a beach cleanup, or if you're not near the beach, any kind of waterway, river or lake cleanup, because all that stuff that's in rivers and lakes can eventually reach the ocean as well. So even local cleanups can have an impact on sea turtles down on the coast and off the shore. So in these areas also, you can remove invasive species, plant native dune vegetation to help stabilize the dunes, and just get involved and act. And if you see somebody harming or harassing a sea turtle, you can report that, as well as sick or injured sea turtles. It's always good to report those and be active in those ways. Use natural resources wisely. So the use of solar energy, the use of renewable resources, cloth grocery bags, bamboo straws, moving away from the plastic, buying local produce or local groceries as much as possible is also a good way to reduce your resource use. Refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. So moving away from those single-use plastics. Moving away from single-use plastic bottles and get a reusable water bottle. Recycle monofilament fishing line or other plastics that you can. Go straw-free, so make sure that when you order drinks in a restaurant or for takeout, just say, no, I don't need a straw, or I have a straw of my own, or things like that. Or see if they offer paper straws or an alternative to plastic straws. If you're on the beach, either visiting or living on the beach, turn out the lights and use sea turtle friendly lighting. The hatchlings are going the wrong way. They spend a lot of energy going the wrong way. You can actually make a beach really dark by using the right type of lights. The bottom photos, the left-hand side, are lights that are white, regular incandescent white lights, and that's the highest disturbance factor for sea turtles. But then if you shift to a red or an amber LED light, one, it uses less energy, and second, the red wavelength is less disturbance to sea turtles. They don't see it as well. They can see it, but it doesn't tend to disturb them as much as like a white light would. Let sea turtles be. They are protected under the Endangered Species Act and here in Florida under our state laws. So they're protected from being harmed, harassed, or disturbed in any way, and that also includes their nest, eggs, hatchlings, anything related to sea turtles. So, if you see a sea turtle, just keep your distance, enjoy the moment and the experience, but let it be. If you feel that a sea turtle is harmed or is sick or injured, there are sea turtle groups generally that you can call, and they'll come out and evaluate the situation as needed. Eat sustainable seafood. So going back to that bycatch issue, there are now requirements for things like turtle excluder devices to be included in shrimp trawls to reduce sea turtle bycatch. And there's a lot of apps out there, especially the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch app, that you can find out the different types of seafood, how they're caught, if it's caught sustainably or non-sustainably, or different areas where it might be better to get it than others. And it's a really cool app, and it gives you a good idea of where your seafood's coming from and how it's being caught. And surprisingly enough, stowing your beach furniture, so bringing stuff off the beach and filling in holes or knocking down sandcastles, as sort of benign as we think that would be, beach furniture can actually stop a female from nesting successfully. They bump into it, they're not sure what it is, and they turn around. Sometimes they can actually get entangled in it and drag that chair back into the water. And then something as simple as a sandcastle or a hole, you know, it's not a big deal to us, but to a hatchling, a sandcastle can be this huge mountain or a hole that we dig that can be a pit where they can never get out of. And even adults have been found actually falling into holes of people have dug in the sand. So just fill it in and leave the beach flat and debris free as possible for those sea turtles to nest during the summer. So for the next part, our virtual sea turtle walk, as Sarah mentioned, this is only being used, it's infrared video footage. So the scouts use red lights, that red LED light, so it won't disturb the turtle, but we're able to still use the video. So what you see is like a white light, you might see even shadows, that's all with red lights, and it's not disturbing the sea turtles, and you notice that she doesn't react to us being around her in this situation. And as we mentioned, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box instead of the chat, and we can go through and answer some of those questions. All right, so we can go to some of those first questions that Logan and Sammy had. So Logan's question was, what is a sea turtle's favorite food? And I tried to get at that a little bit. It's really based on the type of sea turtle. So leatherbacks, it's jellyfish. Green sea turtles, it's seagrasses. For loggerheads, it's probably horseshoe crabs or blue crabs. Same with the Kemp's Ridley. Then hawksbills, that's one of the ones that I hadn't talked about, but we have here in Florida. Hawksbills are very focused on coral reefs, and they absolutely love sponges. And then the Kemp's Ridley I mentioned is similar to loggerheads as well. So it depends on the type of turtle. How old is the oldest sea turtle? Well, we estimate that they probably can live 60 to 80 years. In captivity, we have ones that we believe are actually over 90 years old. But animals tend to live longer in captivity in the wild. So a 90-year-old turtle in the wild is probably pretty unusual. But certainly 60 to 80 is not unreasonable to think about. Let's see, what part of the day do sea turtles come onto the sand? So for the most part, the sea turtles are nesting at night. That's for most species, on average, the females come up at night. One, it's cooler because, you know, their body's not used to being out of the water, so there's a lot of heat. It also tends to be safer from predators. That being said, both Kemp's Ridleys and this other species called olive ridleys both nest often during the day, and they nest in these huge groups called arabatas. And so you have hundreds, if not thousands of turtles all nesting together at the same time in the middle of the day, which is kind of crazy. Leatherbacks are not, it's not unknown or uncommon for them to nest during the day as well. I've even seen loggerheads nest during the day, but it's unusual. Oftentimes down at the Car Refuge, you can get a green sea turtle early morning. If you're walking the beach, there might be a green sea turtle finishing nesting on the beach, but generally it tends to be at night.
It's a question about how leatherbacks protect themselves when they're eating so many jellyfish.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I remember I was mentioning that they have this leathery, tough skin. So basically, they don't have a lot of sensitivity like we do on our skin. You know, we get real sensitive and a jellyfish sting would hurt. But their skin is more like a really tough leather, and so they just don't feel it. It doesn't seem to bother them. So they're most likely immune to it. And then for the most part, the jellyfish they eat don't have really powerful stingers, though they do eat Portuguese man of war on occasion. I've heard, though, that they'll eat just the bell, just the top part of the jellyfish, and they'll bite off the stinging part, and that'll fall away, so it may not ever contact them at all.
What is the approximate population of leatherbacks?
That is a really good question. To be honest, we don't know. You know, we have a good idea of how many leatherbacks there are nesting in the world, and it's probably, I think the most recent estimate was 20 to 30,000, maybe a bit more than that, and that's just nesting females in any one given year. We don't know how many males are out there because the way we're counting these turtles is the females coming up to nest. We don't know how many juveniles or hatchlings. What we do know is that the population in the Atlantic seems to be stable in most places, though it is declining in some places. But the population in the Pacific is definitely in decline and has been for quite some time, which is very concerning for us. Where in the food chain are sea turtles? So for all the species, I guess except for greens, they're considered predators. So they're towards the top of the food chain. As adults, really there's not much that can take an adult sea turtle, but certainly as juveniles, even subadults, sharks can take sea turtles. In the case of leatherbacks, killer whales will go after leatherbacks as well. And, greens fulfill that role as well, but greens are, herbivores, so they're at that sort of middle level in the food chain as well.
How can I find local groups to support sea turtle conservation?
If you're somewhere on the beach or on the coast, even into the Carolinas and Georgia, if you just type, sea turtle group in whatever town you're in, you'll probably get hits on the local groups. There is a site called seaturtle.org that I think lists organizations by countries and by state, and that's seaturtle, all one word, spelled out, .org. But usually just a Google search for your local, for the name of a town or a name of a beach near you will generate that. I don't know. I think California does. So, can you buy a license plate for California? I don't know if California has specialty license plates. I think they do. I don't know if there's a sea turtle license plate. If there is, it wouldn't, be the same one that we have here in Florida. It's a state by state thing. But I know that Georgia and the Carolinas, I think, have a sea turtle license plate, specialty plate. I'm not sure where they are or what's available in California. We do sell them for the front of the car. We have like a mock one. It just says turtle, like the image I showed. It has the same design that you can put on the front of your car. I don't remember if California requires one on the front or not, but that you could get through our gift shop at conserveturtles.org.
How far north do they travel and nest, Dan?
So leatherbacks will travel as far north as Nova Scotia, so Canada, or even as far north as England, off the coast of England. But that's unusual. In terms of nesting in the US, really North Carolina is the extent to the north, which is still pretty good. There's been an occasional nest in Virginia, but nesting is really limited to sort of more warmer temperatures because the eggs that incubate rely on the warmth of the sand to develop. So warmer beaches tend to develop the eggs faster. The cooler beaches you'd find up north, the eggs would take longer to develop, and there's also some other things going on that Sarah will talk about as well related to temperature.
Do the baby turtles stay together or find a new family?
So, often we're asked that, because Finding Nemo, you have that big, all the sea turtles are swimming together in those currents, and that really isn't true. They do stay together in that they all try to find those mats of sargassum seaweed, but they're not specifically looking for other turtles to hang out with. They pretty much are sort of isolated and alone, though obviously when they come to nest, they're all gathered offshore together. When they're on feeding areas, they often will share some common areas. Though actually green sea turtles have their own little patch of seagrass that they graze, that they tend to be territorial about, or appears that there's
Does it harm hatchlings to pick them up and help them to the ocean?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question. So there's a couple things. One is that you want the hatchling to sort of learn where it is. There's might be smells associated with being able to find their nesting beach. It's generally, we think they're able to navigate with magnetic fields, but there's definitely a learning process we believe is happening as the hatchlings are going to the ocean. Now, if the hatchling is going the wrong way, is going over the dune or is getting close to a road, that's, another situation. Legally, no, you can't. If you're not permitted, you're not supposed to touch them. But obviously, if you're saving a hatchling from immediate death, they're not going to arrest you for that. But, if you see a situation that you're concerned about, call that local group or call a Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission. Unfortunately, some people, say that they're rescuing these sea turtle hatchlings. There are other species of turtles and tortoises that live in the dunes, and there are babies that will show up on the beach. Gopher tortoises are often found on the beach as well. And unfortunately, about every year we get an email of somebody a photo saying, "Hey, I saved this hatchling and I put it in the water," and the photos of a gopher tortoise that would drown in the water. So, it's better off just to, get in touch with somebody who absolutely knows if it's sure. If you turn it around and it keeps going in the wrong direction, maybe there's a reason for that. Certainly don't throw it into the water or put it in the water because it may not actually be a sea turtle.
Do sea turtles live in groups or are they solitary?
Yeah, so for the most part, they seem to be solitary. They will interact with each other, but they don't seem to have group behavior. Though in Hawaii, there are definitely areas where there are lots of sea turtles and they're all in an area for a reason. But it's usually they're in the area for like a cleaning station or for a patch of food that they're all using. But we think that they're not specifically seeking out other turtles for companionship. How are we doing on time? Oh, we probably, yeah. Do you want to go ahead and the furthest north, we sort of covered that one, Nova Scotia. Do you want to go ahead and start the thing, and then we can answer some more of these questions during the covering stage? Oh, the seafood app. Let's see. I think it was Monterey Bay. So it's the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch. I'll put that in the chat for y'all.
Welcome to the Car Refuge. Here is an active sea turtle nest predator, a ghost crab, attempting to wet her gills at the shoreline. Our 4 sea turtle scouts are out on the beach looking for a nesting loggerhead sea turtle that all of us can observe. It looks like we already have one emerging from the surf. He's checking the beach both north and south to make sure that the beach is safe for nesting. And once she determines that it is, she will make her way up towards the sand. When loggerheads are near the shoreline, this is the time that they're most likely to spook. So it's very important that we remain a safe distance from our turtle at all times. She has assessed that there are no immediate threats, and she is seeking out a specific spot right at the base of the sand dune where she decides to lay her eggs. Now, while she's up there, she's going to throw sand both with her front flippers and her rear flippers as she tries to create a nice body pit. And then she will use her rear flippers left and right to remove sand so that she can make a nice teardrop-shaped burrow. Our scouts have just indicated to us that she's begun laying, and we can begin to make our way towards our sea turtle. So as we head up and try to get closer to our loggerhead, we're going to remain 3 to 5 feet behind her at all times. Avoid her head, because it is possible to spook a sea turtle while she's laying her egg. A lot of people think that they go into a trance and they cannot be spooked, but that's not entirely true. So again, we're going to stay 3 to 5 feet behind our turtle at all times. We'll try to be as quiet as possible. Now we have approached our nesting turtle, and she's already placed her cloaca, and that is her egg depositing organ, at the top of her teardrop-shaped burrow. And we are observing her contraction. Now, right now, she's in the process of laying between 110 to 115 eggs. Turtles usually lay more eggs early in the nesting season than later in the nesting season. They usually return to the same beak where they nested before, and they nest in a series of 2-week intervals. Now, with each body contraction, she usually lays between 1 to 3 eggs. It's a really nice close-up of the egg laying process. Because the eggs are flexible, she can fit more of the eggs in the egg chamber and also more eggs inside her body. We're back on the surface of the sand again, and notice that her rear flippers are also going up with every contraction. And that really tells us that this is a full body process. It takes a lot of energy for these mother loggerhead sea turtles to lay these eggs. As those rear flippers go up, that's also the easiest way for our scouts to know that it is safe to approach our turtle. Once all the eggs are laid, she begins covering. Now, the rear flippers of sea turtles are very dexterous, and they knead the sand almost like we would knead bread dough. She's trying to protect her eggs from the elements, but they are still vulnerable to fluctuating temperatures on the beach, flooding by high tides and storms, and also predation by animals like coyotes, raccoons, and ghost crabs. One major threat to sea turtles is climate change and the rising temperatures on the beach due to climate change. There is a saying in sea turtle biology, hot chicks, cool dudes. And what this saying means is that if a nest incubates at a temperature above 88 degrees Fahrenheit, that nest will be all female. If a nest incubates at a temperature below 82 degrees Fahrenheit, that nest will be all male. And if the nest fluctuates between 82 and 88 degrees Fahrenheit, there will be a nice mix of both males and female hatchlings. Some South Florida beaches are already producing all female hatchlings. Incubation usually takes about 60 days, but temperature does determine the rate at which embryos develop. For example, if the temperatures are higher, that nest may hatch a little sooner. If the temperatures are cooler, the nest may hatch a little later. We have a question in the question and answer box. How many eggs on average are in a nest? And usually that's between about 110 to 115 eggs. What is the best way to create and protect sand beetles? That's a great question. One of the most important ways to protect our beaches is to make sure that we have healthy native plants right along our shorelines. Especially important for our front owners. In Florida, those would be plants like sea grapes and sea oaks. All of these plants have nice roots that really hold that sand down when we get our big storm. And the way that you can actually help improve the dunes in your area is to participate in a native dune planting event. At the Barrier Islands Sanctuary, we usually host a oak planting event to restore our dunes every February. Definitely encourage you to find those events in your area. It looks like our loggerhead is continuing to meticulously cover her eggs. She's already put a great deal of energy into this nest, and she'll never visit this nest again. This is simply her own need to protect her hatchlings. Got a great question here. Sea turtle hatching related to the tide, does tide matter to sea turtles? That's a great question. With our hatching sea turtles, what they're usually looking for are temperature changes. And they're waiting for a temperature drop. So right after it's dark or right before dawn, these are common times for our hatching. Um, and then are these turtles found more on the Atlantic coast versus the Gulf of Mexico? Loggerheads are found on both coasts of the state of Florida. They nest in much greater numbers, though, in our refuge than anywhere else in the state, which is on the Atlantic. Another question about how many days do the eggs incubate? On average, it's about 60 days, so there is a range there. If it's been excessively warm, they tend to hatch a little sooner. If it's been cooler, they hatch a little later. It looks like our loggerhead has begun camouflaging. Notice that her front flippers are also flinging sand, which indicates to us that she has begun this next stage of the nesting process. Now, she can spend a great deal of time in the camouflage stage. And what she's trying to do during this stage is she's trying to spread her scent all over the surface of the sand and also make a big mess on the beach so that predators who would like to find the exact spot where she laid her eggs will have a really difficult time. This is also the point where sometimes our turtles get really tired and they'll take a rest. Some will even fall asleep, wake up again, and begin camouflaging again. Now, after she has thoroughly camouflaged her nest, she makes the turn for the ocean. She crawls slowly down the beach. She's very tired. She's heading back to sea to rest, or she either comes back up onto the beach about 2 weeks later to lay another clutch of eggs, or if it's at the end of her nesting season, she will migrate and head out to her feeding grounds. Usually our loggerheads will nest about every 2.7 years. So between 2 and 3 years, she'll come back to her nesting. Once she reaches the surf, watch for her first breath. There.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. There are a couple more questions. Do you think that plastic pollution can interrupt nesting or migration behavior? Have you seen any instances of plastic sort of getting in the way of them while they're nesting on the beach?
I have not personally observed it. I mean, it's certainly theoretically possible that they may be getting tripped up on, especially if there's a line. Monofilament line could certainly entangle a turtle on the beach. I haven't personally seen it. It's more likely that they'll get stuck under dune crossovers. In fact, we just had a green do that this past week.
Oh yeah, I'd heard about that. And in terms of migration, the plastic pollution would be, the issue would be them, thinking that the plastic is food during that migration, because they'll feed opportunistically. So if there's the opportunity to find food when they're swimming from the nesting beach back to their feeding area, they will. So that would be the only thing that I would see about that. There was a question about what is the main difference between the leatherback and the green sea turtle shell composition?
Okay.
So, so the leatherback is, so it's more of a skin, right? Like a tough skin. And underneath that is this layer of fibers. And they're all sort of crossing each other. Like a matrix of these fibers that give the shell some form and stability, as well as there's sort of this cartilage that runs from the front to the back of the shell. There's these 7 ridges on the shell as well. You can kind of see them here in this picture. And each of those have a lot of pieces of stiff cartilage in it to give it their form as well. So it's totally unlike other turtles or other sea turtles structure, because like a green sea turtle, what you have is you have bone that forms the shell. It's actually their spinal cord, their rib cage, and all that. And over that are these scutes, or this material that is made out of the same stuff as our fingernails and our toenails. So a real good example of that is this is a green sea turtle shell, a juvenile. And on the inside, you can see that spinal cord and then all the rib cages going off of it, right? And all this stuff are the scute material. And you can see there's a little section here where you can see the bone where it's come off. And so all this is the same stuff as our toenails and our fingernails. So that's really the big difference. And while the leatherback, sort of it holds their shape, and there's probably some, they don't have the hard bones. It's more like a cartilage, more like a shark as well. So it's a very different composition. The leatherbacks are just totally bizarre and crazy animals, not only for sea turtles, but just in general, because of a lot of these adaptations to be able to survive, which is pretty cool. What is the purpose of a sea turtle? What role do sea turtles serve in nature? Do you want to talk about that, Sarah? Or you want
Sure, I'm happy to. Every animal in nature has a very important, what we call a niche. And that means that they have a very specific role to play, and they're balancing the ecosystem in some way. Our sea turtles eat a wide variety of foods in multiple different marine habitats. And without them, it's entirely possible for those ecosystems to get out of whack. For example, our sea turtles, like the greens, for example, eat algae. And if they were not to eat algae, it's entirely possible that algae would overrun some of our estuaries, our local reefs. Algae has a tendency to really take over in conditions where those herbivores are lacking. And that's just one example. And so really we'd have to really delve into that question. We kind of have to get into each species and what their role is in the ecosystem. Because they eat a lot of different foods, those roles are slightly different. But as John Muir once said, when you tug at any link in the web of life, the entire link is connected. And it's possible for it to collapse just by tugging on one link. The same is true with our sea turtles.
Yeah. And they are one of the very few animals that are actually adding nutrients to the beach and dune system through their eggs and through hatchlings that don't emerge from those nests. And beaches and dunes tend to be very nutrient poor, so they're pretty important for the health of our dunes as well. Another question, do sea turtles drink water? Yeah, they drink
All the time.
yeah. So, and actually the problem is they drink too much of it. So if you think about if you're an animal in the ocean and your food's in the water and you're trying to eat that food, you tend to take in a lot of extra seawater. And seawater has a lot of salt in it, so similar to us, too much salt in your body isn't a good thing. And sea turtles and other marine animals, so seabirds and dolphins and whales, have this really cool adaptation, which is these really well-developed salt glands. So if you've ever tasted your own tears, they kind of taste a little salty. We get rid of salt out of our body through our tears. It's one of the ways we do it. But sea turtles are really good at it. They have very well-developed tear ducts or salt glands. And there's often a comment of people who might see a sea turtle nesting that it looks like she's crying. And basically that's just them getting rid of all that excess salt out of their body through those salt glands near their eyes. So they're not actually crying, they're just getting rid of all the salt that they've been drinking in all that salt water they've been consuming. A similar question, can sea turtles survive in fresh water? For a limited amount of time, but it's not really good for them. We don't, we find them in brackish water, so the mix of salt water and fresh water. But there's a couple of things. One is their food isn't there in fresh water, so they wouldn't be able to survive that aspect of it. And just their weight, being in salt water, it handles their weight better. You're more buoyant, you float better in salt water compared to fresh water. So that would throw their ability to adjust how much they dive or how easy it is for them to surface to breathe air. So yes, they probably could survive, but they wouldn't be healthy. It wouldn't be something you'd want to do, allow them to do for long term. All right, do we have, that's all the questions in our Q&A, and there's nothing in the chat. Have somebody share it with their students? Yes, please. We are recording this, so hopefully we'll edit it up a little bit and be able to post it on the Sea Turtle Conservancy website, maybe share it through our Facebook page as well. Give us a couple days to do that and check back. At this point, if anybody has any last minute questions or comments, this is your time to do that. I know we're over our 1 hour. Oh, here's another question that popped up.
How does the eggs give nutrients to the dune?
Okay, so yeah, so if an egg doesn't hatch and it sort of rots, the egg itself is very nutritious. I mean, like we eat, people eat eggs and stuff like that. There's a lot of nutrients, a lot of proteins. And so the roots of the dune vegetation can actually get into those and find those nutrients and absorb those nutrients. So that's sort of how it's moving energy from the ocean into those dune system.
And do we keep an eye on rehabilitated turtles like Maisie?
Only when we attach a satellite transmitter to them. So we do partner with rehabilitation centers to attach satellite transmitters to be able to follow their movements after they're released. There's a lot of questions about whether turtles that have been in captivity, even if it's rehabilitation, will go back and act normally once they're released. And from all the satellite tracking that we've done, it does appear that they're behaving normally again. They're going back to these areas where we would expect them to find food. Maisie is sort of unusual in that because she's a hybrid sea turtle. She's a cross between, she's part green sea turtle and part hawksbill sea turtle. So the question that we had with her was, is she going to go to an area where hawksbills find food, or is she going to go to an area where green turtles find food? And she seems to be hanging out in the Florida Keys around a reef system, which would suggest that she's foraging or feeding more like a hawksbill, but there may be seagrass beds there too. It'd be an interesting place to go visit and diving to see what she's feeding on there.
Have we ever incubated a turtle egg?
So STC in general is sort of more of the hands-off approach for that kind of stuff. There are places that move or relocate eggs into hatcheries and nurseries. For the most part, we prefer to try to address the problems that would cause somebody to do that instead of actually doing that. But it is done. It's done at Padre Island National Seashore to help rebuild the Kemp's Ridley population. So it is done, and there's a whole slew of conditions and situations. There are definitely temperatures you need to keep the eggs incubating. As Sarah mentioned, the temperature can affect the gender of the hatchlings. So, you know, you can start changing and altering the natural sex ratios of a nest. So there's a lot of complications with using hatcheries and incubating sea turtle eggs. And it's really a last resort if there's no other options.
How long do the trackers on the turtles last?
So generally, we expect them at least to last 6 months to a year. Hopefully, it'll be at least a year to up to 2 years. Longest one we've tracked was close to 5 years, which is unusual. So usually, that sort of shows us that the limitation isn't like the batteries or the technology of the transmitter. The antenna is really the weak point for a transmitter, is that it gets damaged as the turtles go under rocks or under coral, and it gets rubbed off or destroyed. Or you know, eventually they are designed to fall off as well, and that can happen, especially on the younger turtles because they're growing quicker. All right. And Logan and family, you guys are more than welcome. Glad you guys could join us from Turtle and Hughes. That was fantastic that you guys were able to do that. So hopefully I answered your questions. If you have more questions, anybody, feel free to email either Sarah or myself with questions, and we'll do our best to answer those. I think we're good then. All right.
Okay, well, on behalf of the Sea Turtle Conservancy, we want to thank you for tuning in to our virtual turtle walk on the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. We hope you'll be able to join us for an in-person turtle walk, hopefully in summer 2021. Continue following the Sea Turtle Conservancy on conserveturtles.org and all of our social media handles. We just kicked off our Tour de Turtles Sea Turtle Migration Marathon. And right now we have both a leatherback race going on and a shelled turtle race going on. So definitely track our turtles on tourdeturtles.org. When you leave this webinar, you will be directed to a survey, and we really appreciate your feedback. So feel free, like Dan said, to email either Dan or I, just our first name, or mine's Sarah at conserveturtles.org, and his is Dr. Evans at conserveturtles.org. And with that, we'd like to say have a beautiful day.